For the next few days, all seemed well. John was in a good mood, Julian was happy to have us around, and I was daring to hope that we had got through the worst. I felt determined once more to make my marriage work, but this brief happy respite soon ended. John was due to go to the States with Paul on a business trip in connection with Apple. I suggested that I go with him. It seemed to me that if we were going to remain close, we should spend more time together, and a trip to New York would be fun. John's answer was a flat no. He refused to look at me or discuss it. I felt my stomach tighten. He was distancing himself from me again. Over the next few days he was irritable and withdrawn, and I felt a rising sense of panic because I couldn't reach him. I didn't want to be left alone in the house, waiting and wondering while he was away, so I asked him if he would mind me taking my mother and Julian to Italy for 2 weeks. "Yeah, sure," he replied. Organising the Italian trip gave me something to do, and I threw myself into it, anxious to take my mind off John. At the time, going away seemed like the best thing to do. In Italy, there would be the warmth, kindness, and company I needed. Mum drove down to Kenwood with my aunt and uncle, who were coming with us. I had always got on with Daisy, Mum's sister, and, perhaps with an intimation of what was to come, I wanted my family around me. In Italy, we stayed at the same hotel in Pesaro, where we'd been 2 years earlier. The Bassanini family were as hospitable as ever. Despite my anxiety, I tried hard to make the holiday enjoyable for everyone. I played on the beach with Julian and explored the little town with Mum. Whatever lay ahead, I would deal with it when I got home. One of the hotel waitresses was a Lancashire girl, and a great laugh. We became friendly and she suggested we go out for a night. I was uncertain. I was feeling low that day and had a sore throat coming on. I certainly didn't want us to look like 2 single girls trying to pick up men. She suggested we ask Roberto, the son of the hotel owners, to take us out. He said he'd be delighted to accompany us, and I began to look forward to it. So far I had stayed quietly in the hotel with my family. It would cheer me up to have fun. Roberto was charming and courteous, and looked after us beautifully. He was extrovert, seemed to know everyone in town, introducing us to dozens of people as we moved from bar to bar. I had a good time, and for a few hours forgot my troubles. When our car drew up outside the hotel at about 2 a.m., Roberto opened the door for me, and I stepped out to see a familiar figure. Magic Alex. He was hovering outside the hotel, agitated. What on earth was he doing there? He looked at me and Roberto, and my heart sank. Here I was in the small hours with a good-looking young Italian. God forbid that Alex might think I was having a holiday romance. We went inside and found Mum sitting in the lobby, looking distressed. I asked Alex what was going on. He said, "I've come with a message from John. He's going to divorce you, take Julian away from you, and send you back to Hoylake." My knees gave way. I felt drained and ill. All I could think at that moment was how cowardly John was to send his lapdog, because he couldn't face me. Far more than simply evasive, it was sinister and cruel. When I returned to London, I tried to phone John, but got no answer. What was I supposed to do next? Hours after I arrived, an envelope was delivered by hand. The letter inside it informed me that John was suing me for divorce on the grounds of my adultery with Roberto Bassanini. Presumably, Alex had told John I had been out with him. It was laughable. Roberto had been kind and a good friend, but I had never been unfaithful to John. It was his attempt to make himself feel better about what he was doing. What had happened to John that he could do this? I had loved him passionately for so many years, but now I lost all respect for him. I had always believed he was a fundamentally decent person, but in accusing me of adultery and threatening to take Julian from me, he had put aside every ounce of decency. He knew I hadn't been unfaithful to him, and he knew that to lose Julian would break my heart. Who was advising him that this was the best way to end his marriage? A few days later, Peter Brown called from the Beatles office to say that Mum, Julian and I could move back to Kenwood, and John and Yoko would have the London flat. When we moved back to Kenwood, John agreed to a meeting. He would come to see me the following Tuesday at 3:30. As the time for his arrival approached, Mum, Dot and I were in the kitchen with Julian. When the front door bell rang, we jumped up in unison. I looked out of the window. John and Yoko were standing outside together, dressed from head to toe in black. I felt panicky. God, he's brought her with him. Dot showed them into the den to give me a minute to adjust to this new development. It hadn't occurred to me that Yoko would be there too. Mum was fuming. How dare that woman come? What's the matter with John? I'm coming with you, love. There's no way you're going to face them alone. She was ready to annihilate them both, and Dot had to physically restrain her until she burst into tears. There was no calming her, but I did my best. I'll be okay, Mum, I promise. I'm a big girl now. Julian was jumping up and down, longing to see his daddy. I took his hand and headed for the den. When we walked in, I barely recognized John. It had been only a few weeks since we'd last met, but he was thinner, almost gaunt. His face was deadly serious. There was no hint of a smile, even when Julian ran up to him. He was quite simply not the John I knew. It was as if he had taken on a different persona. He was sitting on the footstool. Yoko was beside him in the armchair, shrouded by her hair, her face set in an expressionless mask, the fingers of one hand picking at the nails of the other. God, why couldn't he have chosen someone easier, someone I might have related to? What power did she have over him? The thought of her looking after my son was ghastly. Did she feel no remorse or embarrassment? It seemed not. John spoke first. "What did you want to see me for?" he said coldly. He was defiant, ready for battle, and I was clearly the enemy. I sat down on the sofa. "Look, John, can't we find a better way to do this? I haven't been unfaithful to you. I'm sure you know that." John could barely look me in the eye. "Forget all that bullshit, Cyn. You're no innocent little flower." I tried again. "John, I was with my family in Italy. I was with Julian. Do you honestly think I would do that to them or to you?" At this point, Yoko disappeared briefly. Dot told me later that she'd gone into the kitchen to ask my mother for a glass of water. Mum told her in no uncertain terms how she felt. "Get out of this house. Get out of our lives. Haven't you any shame? Look at this little boy. Don't you care about what you're doing? You're breaking everyone's hearts." Back in the den, John shot another broadside at me. "What about that Yankee cowboy?" "What Yankee cowboy?" "In India." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The Yankee cowboy was an American actor called Tom Simcox, who we'd met at the Maharishi's Center. I got on well with him, but the idea that we'd had an affair was preposterous. Who would be next in line as my lover? The elderly gardener? There was more. You know that when he left Rishikesh, that cowboy gave George a letter to pass on to you. But instead he gave it to me. He was being loyal. I was bemused and curious. So what was in this mysterious letter, John? He refused to tell me. I suspected he was disappointed that I hadn't looked more guilty. Yoko came back in. John announced in the same cold, clipped tone he had used throughout that talking was pointless. I was feeling more and more distressed. I tried one last time. "John, please, let's discuss things. We can do that through the lawyers." Then to Yoko, "Come on, let's go." He called bye to Julian and marched out of the house, Yoko at his heels. I went back into the den and collapsed in tears on the sofa. This wasn't going to be a friendly parting. I'd given it my best effort and got nowhere.